Guys, I'm VW. I have won 3 majors in CSGO, and this is Thorin's YouTube channel.
Tired of evil entities pretending to be AIs? Finding it hard to get through a few hours of work in a world where if you express an authentic human sentiment, instead of just being a good person TM, you will be castigated and scapegoated by friends and peers? Sick of the hard drop-off the moment your caffeine source wears off? Well, have I got news for you, because GamerSupps is the drink for you. That's GamerSupps. White Grapefruit, check out the new flavour. 10% off with the code Thorin, THORIN, at gamersupps.gg. And don't forget to put those free samples in your shipping basket. You know you like those free samples, boys and girls. That's GamerSupps, the thinking man's energy formula. Now, obviously, Last Dance lineups are a big topic ever since Fallen suggested they do it in CSGO, except they didn't. They just made some of the players Fallen for FNX, etc. And then they brought in Bolts. It wasn't even in the lineup that they were talking about. It was like a true Last Dance. In honour of Michael Jordan's The Last Dance, where the Bulls kept the championship lineup going for one more year and they won the championship, and then he retired and the team was broken up by Jerry Krause and all that jazz. The premise is like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to do that? And ever since then, you saw a whole bunch of other legendary players flex like, yeah, maybe we do a Last Dance. Maybe we do it. Like, first of all, Last Dance lineups have been tried to death. Some of them just don't even get public. Like, famously, MTW, the legendary 1.16 with Ave and Zonic and Triz, they tried to come back in CSGO years later and think that they could, like, play together and get leveled up. Now, that basically died when Zonic went and became the coach of Astralis. By the way, he won 5 majors doing that. I think it was a pretty good decision all in all. And spoiler, none of the rest of them went on to do anything as players. Then you have the whole thing where in 1.6 this was tried a million times with the Russian scene, like Virtus Pro, with the Brazilian scene, MIBR lineups, etc. There were so many times that when things went badly, they recreated an old lineup and brought it back. One of the best examples of a Last Dance lineup, by the way, was obviously the FNATIC 2010 lineup, where what happened was, due to some drama at the end of 2009, after that amazing run of FNATIC being the best team of the year, they had a couple of key losses and there was some drama behind the scenes, and Gux got kicked out, the third best player on the team. So he went to Rivals SK, he got SK into a winning position, he actually was able to like beat out FNATIC at some events, and basically he proved so good that you had to look at him if you were FNATIC and think, he used to be in our team. Meanwhile, FNATIC finally was just getting beaten by Na'Vi, and Na'Vi was the best team in the world, winning all the majors. So they brought him back. They got a few wins over Na'Vi. They didn't really get the big championships they wanted. And again, the lineup went away. He left the lineup eventually and was in Lions years later. And obviously SK ended up getting Get Right at Forest. So that was like at least one that was like good on paper. And the key thing for me, there's 2 elements here is, at least lineups like that, where it's in recent memory you were amazing, and right now some of your players are amazing, it makes sense in those lineups to potentially do a Last Dance. Maybe you can recreate some of the form, some of the chemistry, and you hope that the same reasons don't plague you. Maybe you've learned and matured and gone through other experiences in other teams. I can tell you right now, the Gug Skywounds SK made him realise it's a lot better to have Forrest and Get Right as your teammates. I'm having a hard carry here, but at the same time, they saw him in a different light. Like, oh, he could be a star player in his own right. Actually, we do need him. Like, Threat's not cutting it in that regard. So those lineups, in my opinion, earned the right to ask for a Last Dance lineup. They were good enough, and it was in recent enough memory that they had a really good lineup. That's why I always say it. When Nico asks, or doesn't ask, but what he wants happens in G2 or FaZe, it's not like I'm saying don't do it, or Nico can't be right. But it's like, let's take responsibility. Yeah, try it. He's earned the right to ask for certain teammates and ask for a certain type of a lineup and a certain type of IGL and coach. My problem is just if it doesn't work out, then you have to hold him accountable and be like, right, you fucking my team up, or you know what, that was your last chance, or right, now I'm making the decisions. My opinion is when stuff like those Russian and Brazilian lineups tried recreating themselves, not the CSGO ones, I don't think they actually understood what they were doing. What they were doing was this concept that comes from the idea that when civilizations decay, what they do is they get into an emergency crisis point and they reach back as far as they can. Something Kenny talked about in the Archaic Revival. They reach back to the oldest, last point where everything seemed cool, a golden age, where things were awesome and you had the spirit of the people and you had an ideology and a sense of who you are and a direction. And they try and recreate that. They have a revival of that, a renaissance, and they hope that sort of sparks change and makes things work out. But the problem there, like I've alluded to at Teams, is you're ignoring why you decayed. You're ignoring what happened to your institutions, your values, your virtues, what happened to the cultural identity, the myth of who your people are. I could almost make this a side channel video, but I'll just leave it there. So I would say some of these lineups were just doing that. What happened is things went bad and they were just like, right, remember that old great lineup? Just bring them back. Just make the lineup again. Except it doesn't really work, does it? Like in CSGO, for example, those legendary lineups, the reason why it was key that Magus and Dupree, and notice they did it as swapped, it's just more supportive roles, were able to win a major again, is because teams don't actually break their lineup up and then come back and win majors later on. You have these distinct periods of like NIP and FNATIC and the Brazilians, and then you have like, well, the fluke ones, and you have Astralis come along, and then you have like what would have been FaZe, but they didn't win. And then you have the real Astralis come along. You have the Liquid not get to win. But people don't come back and win again. Then Na'Vi had their time period. Then FaZe had their time period. Now Vitality has theirs. It is distinct between the players and who they are. They don't come back as repeat winners years later. That's why Apex winning all those years later as the asterisk. That's not as an IGL, is it? He won years later from being entry to being an IGL all those years after the fact, whatever, 8 years at this point in time. So to me, I actually think that that approach just doesn't work generally, but I can see why people do it. And especially if the expectations are at a lower level. That's at least one area where Fallen sort of get it right. No one really thought they were going to win tournaments except people are idiots. No one really thought they could ever play to the level they could before. The idea was, will it just be cool? Will we have sort of like a fun nostalgia element? Can we even recreate a little bit of the magic? And you know what? Actually, to be fair, I actually think Fallen and Fur did do that together. Them playing together is still sort of fun and entertaining. The problem is the others just it didn't work as a concept. And Fallen just isn't world-class enough for either aspects, IGL or AWPA, to actually make it so they could ever have been relevant in the big tournaments. So for me, an example of a last dance that people always forget about is the attempted last dance of FNATIC, the Swedes. This was the lineup where, not the one with Prodax, because, I mean, in a way they tried that because JW, flusha and KRiMZ left at one point FNATIC and went to Godset where Prodax was because they thought, hey, I want the IGL back. And that just didn't work out. Quickly, KRiMZ came back, and then later on, as I'm talking about now, they just recreated the Dennis lineup. We're talking about the one that won the 6 LANs in a row, then got banged out by Kerrigan's Astralis at MLG Columbus, then had olofm go away because he had his injury problems, and then later on come back in the summer, have a few more months, and then eventually he just said, right, fuck it. And they did that mad one where the players left, like I said, and went to Godsend and took the spot for the major with them. But then it came back because KRiMZ came back to FNATIC. Like I pointed out in a video how corrupt that could potentially be. But people ignored me, the idea that players own the slot. What do you know? They played God with an organisation's careers, even though they were all getting salaries. So we're talking about the one that won the 6 LANs in a row. But even then, some of them are like a bit sus, right? So this is the one where on October 12th of 2015, the legendary FNATIC lineup replaced Pronax with Dennis. And even then, Dennis was like not really supposed to be just like the IG. It was like him and flusha were doing some of those things. And they lost Pronax because his fragging was out and they hadn't done that well at the last major against Envious. Then what happened was they had the 6 LANs in a row. They had the major that they sort of bombed in the quarters. Then Olof had this injury in his hand, which it turned out he'd had at the major as well, even though at the time he's considered the best player in the world. They brought in that guy Plessen, but then that didn't really work out. Then they brought in Wenton to replace Plessen. And then Olof came back something like just over two months and a week after he'd gone out. They had a little summer run that lasted about 2 months with the Dennis lineup. So they already recreated it once already. But to be fair, that's because Olof was on like M&E sabbatical because of injury. Then flusha, JW and KRiMZ went to Godsend. KRiMZ came back like, I think it was like 2 months and a week after that. Then the next year in 2017, you had flusha and JW return after the E-League Atlanta Major, where it didn't work out for either team, quite frankly. I mean, yeah, FNATIC made the semis, but the way they lost to Astralis, you could tell they were never going to win again. They could never be the champions, and they thought, recreate the lineup, it could work. And then you had a period of about 6 months and 2 weeks where they recreated the Dennis lineup. So let's go look into it. So we're not talking about the original FNATIC lineup with Prodax and KRiMZ and who won all those championships. That's the one that started down here. G3 was the first tournament. They were in a semis at their first tournament, a final of a major in their second. Then they started winning tournaments. They obviously forfeit, so they come 5th to 8th at DreamHack Winter. They go back again. They lose out early on. Obviously, MLG X Games Aspen is won by LDLC. Then they come to win like Pantamero, Kenny S wins the MVP. Everyone knows the rest of it. Then they win the 2 majors. Between them, they had the dodgy period, but they would nick tournaments like ESL Pro Series, Pro League. And then they basically get this position where they get wrecked here at DreamHack Cluj-Napoca in the quarters by Envious and think, right, that's it. It's just over. We haven't won recently enough. Like last time we won was back in August. We've lost this time. It's over. They bring in Dennis, someone that obviously had been in LGB with KRiMZ, with olofm. They hit the ground running immediately. They won Fragmite Masters Season 5. Then they won Pro League Season 2 finals. Oh, by the way, the first tournament they won was DreamHack Winter, which was the one with Richard and Lauder, which was Stage 3 finals, even though it was hosted at DreamHack Winter. So they won the 3 tournaments in the year. Then they came and they won Star Series, which was a big one. Top teams there. The ESL Expo was no big deal. It's just a silly sort of exhibition tournament. But then they won KRiMZ. At this time, everyone thought they were going to win the MLG Columbus Major. They won 6 tournaments in a row they were supposed to. They didn't. So then we had this period where they tried to play without Olof. Then they got him back. They were able to make some semis of big tournaments. They were supposed to be, remember, in the final against SK at Cologne, but Team Liquid and particularly Simple just said no and went to the final instead. That would have been one of the all-time great banger finals. And I know the Brazilian guys wanted to finally slay FNATIC in the best of 3 on LAN, which they hadn't done yet. So then you get this lineup now. This is the other period at this point. You have the one run at the E-League Major. So they make the change, right? And the change happens in the 4th of February 2017. So you'll see here, it's basically right after, on the day of this close qualifier. They go for their first tournament to DreamHack Masters. You'll see until Olaf Meister leaves to go to FaZe is what ruins this lineup. So that happened in August the 20th. So you'll see it runs right through to this next major, to PGL Krakow. Basically from one major to another, they try this new lineup. So let's go look at the actual performance and the results, right? So the first tournament was DreamHack Masters Las Vegas. It was only like something like a week or so, week and a half after they'd made the lineup again with Dennis and the guys coming from Godsent. They go to the tournament. They're in a group that admittedly, it's not the hardest group in the whole tournament. Like you'd actually look at some of these ones and say they're harder. Like maybe this one here. You might even say this one up here is harder, although at the time Optic had already lost Stanislaus, so maybe not. So in their group, what happens is they lose to Gambit on Inferno quite heavily. They beat Misfits of Sean Gares, but this is before they had Devo Duek and Amanek. This is when they still had the NA lineup, so who gives a shit about that one? And then they lost in a best-of-3 series to Virtus Pro, who people know won this tournament and almost won the Atlanta Major. So no shame in that, but you do get absolutely stomped overall in the series. So, okay, you go out in second to last place there. Not a great performance. Then you go to Katowice. You go to the World Championship, as ESL called it in the IM circuit. A year earlier, with this same lineup, you won this tournament. You beat Luminosity. You didn't even have to play Navi because they lost Luminosity in the semis. You proved yourself to be the best team in the world. You did that great comeback against Astralis in the semis when it was a really late night game. I remember it all. So at this tournament, 7th to 8th place. That's not what you expect. That's not even playoffs, remember, in this format. So you come down here, this was the one where they swapped it up again, and this time they did it more like Pro League, massive best-of-1 groups with 6 teams. And they're on the verge, they go 2-3, but the problem is 3 teams go 4-1. And so the shit out of luck. Sometimes 2-3 can even get you like a tiebreaker for third, but it didn't get them on this one. So what happened was they beat NIP, who at this point in time, remember this is early 2017, NIP's just sort of whatever. Every now and then they have to pop off at the Auckland, but that's later in the years, like late 2016, late 2017. They beat them narrowly on cash. They lose to FaZe, who's just got an equal at this event on train. Decently convincing. They beat Optic, who at this point in time has already lost Stanislaw, and they've brought in Hiko to replace him, and Hiko's trying to IGL at this point in time, and this lineup was just never good. They actually beat them, but again, who cares? Then you go down, they lost narrowly to Astralis, who's the best team in the world at the time, just won the major on Inferno. Okay, banger game. Obviously, classically, the FNATIC guys match up well against Astralis, even though Astralis typically, even as TSM, did beat them. So, just a great game all in all. They lose narrowly to Immortals on Mirage. Immortals has a great run at this tournament. This is when they still had FNX. And obviously, later in the year, with KNG, were able to go to the major final. But this is when they're still on the rise. This is a very narrow one. So to be fair, if they win, I mean, the obvious too is if they win the overtime session against Astralis, they're going to go through or get the tiebreaker. And if they win against Immortals, who they had the massive lead on Mirage, then they also go through. But they didn't get to the playoffs. They didn't get there overall. And in the end, okay, just an all right run, isn't it? A few odd BO1s that look good. Then we had Star Series Season 3 back in Kiev, the one that was won by FaZe in epic fashion over Astralis, if you remember. This is when Na'Vi still has Guardian and Simple, and they don't have Zeus. Zeus is off in Gambit at the time. You'll see, they get through the Swiss system. They're tied for last place 3-2. So they're able to beat Gambit, who's an all right team, but not a great team. They lose to Na'Vi. Na'Vi's just got way more firepower. They lose to Astralis. Astralis is the best team in the world in theory, although obviously they'd won KRiMZ, but they'd lost DreamHack. Everyone still had them as number 1. They managed to beat VP, which is a big deal. This is where VP bombed the tournament, by the way. And then they actually managed to beat NIP right on the end. But NIP's having their own issues. This is the era where they've changed some of their players out. I think it's when they had Draken. So it's just not that great, is it? Yeah, so when they got Draken in. So you go look at the results. They beat Gambit pretty heavily. They stood Na'Vi fairly heavily. Interestingly, Overpass later in the summer would become a big map for FNATIC. They lose to Astralis in another close game. Admittedly, this is a good one on Mirage. They just always had fun games against Astralis for some reason, probably because of the intuitive style of play of FNATIC. They smash VP on Inferno, so that was big time. And then they beat NIP fairly handily on Train. Train was actually a pretty good map early on for FNATIC, one they were relying on. So they make it to the playoffs. But in the playoffs, they have to play a team that they've just lost to. They have to play Na'Vi. And even though this is one of the only times Na'Vi ever made the semi in this run, by the way, when they had Simple, beyond early on when they won that ESL New York the year earlier, you can see their map wins big on Inferno, but they get body bagged on Overpass and body bagged on the Decider on Mirage. So all in all, not that great. And then Na'Vi themselves go out against Astralis. So yeah, like, it's not bad, but it's also not that much better than FNATIC was doing before. It's better than Gods did, but that's about it. So we're already a few tournaments deep. Now we're on to ESL Pro League Season 5 finals, the one that was won by the G2 Super Team over North, and they beat SK in the semis. Famously, they were a good team at beating SK. They won the only tournaments. It's the reason why we always say, whatever it was, 5 out of 6 tournaments won by the SK team. This was the one they didn't win, but they lost to the champion, to be fair. So at this tournament, it's another one. Remember, it's Pro League style, so 6 teams, round robin. This time, they don't get out on the basis of a tiebreaker. Overtime tiebreakers, these stupid ones where you play until a certain amount of rounds and they lose to Envious and SK. Obviously, the Envious one's the unforgivable one. This is the RPK Scream lineup that is not that good in Envious. It's one of the only runs they even made at this point in time. So you go look at the group, and they were in position to just get out of this group. They beat up on IMT, on Inferno, nicely. They take out Envious, okay, handle them on Inferno as well. Classic map for FNATIC. They lose to SK big time on Cash, but SK at this point in time is about to become the best team in the world. They beat Cloud9, who's about to do their summer run after this, but it's in actually a bit of trouble at the LANs, on Nuke, big time CT half. Then, the problem that costs them is, they lose to G2 on Overpass, who eventually wins the tournament. And the brutal thing is, you got 3-2, you only lost to SK and G2, two of the best teams at the tournament. But then this is the one that kills you. It's the Envious loss here. And then the fact that Envious somehow manages to beat SK. So that's just a one-off. No one even knows how that happened. Envious was never that good a lineup. Okay, a little bit unlucky, but even so, you know, it's never breaking FNATIC's way. It's just not really that great a move, this, is it? Then you go to DreamHack Open Summer. Crucially, DreamHack Open. At this point in time, DreamHack Summer's not a massive tournament. It has some good teams there. So SK is the best team in the world. Cloud9's all right, but needs to attend the event to get some wins up and come and actually, they get bombed out of this one. You have Gambit, who's all right and has won, like, I think DreamHack Austin already at this point in time. Immortals is sort of on the rise up. They're not a bad team. They managed to make semis here. You have Mouse Sports, but it's not the great lineup. It's before they have Rops in the lineup, but they don't have Sonny yet, and Rops is very, very fresh at this point in time. Singularity are just a bunch of Danish players, but with refresh, you might notice. And then CLG is actually the one where, like, Chet, I'm a Pet, and FNS are just working miracles to beat teams like Gambit and get these squads on maps that you can actually play them on. So in the group, they get out of the group, which is actually not bad considering the group that they were in. They managed to beat out Cloud9 on Mirage. Solid map for these guys still. It's just a classic map for the FNATIC core. They narrowly lose to CLG on Train in overtime, an epic overtime. There's no way that should be happening, but okay, you can lose. You still get out, though, because they get the biggest win of their whole time together, which is this best-of-3 win over Gambit, who at the time is ranked number 6 in the world, and they beat them 2-0, and they get an overtime win on the Inferno there. Then you go into the playoffs. They play Immortals, who's a rising team. Immortals beats them narrowly on Inferno. They convincingly beat them on Overpass, which becomes basically the map for them at this tournament. And then they smash them on Mirage, another good FNATIC team. This is a big performance. This is a big. The problem is, Immortals not like a super high-ranked team at the time. They get to a final. Listen, it's not a giant final. There's no Astralis. There's no FaZe. There's no G2 here. A bunch of top. There's no North. A bunch of the big name teams aren't here at the tournament. But even so, there's a catty little bunch of teams. There's still SK. They get to play SK in the final. They actually beat SK big time on Overpass, which becomes like a strength of FNATIC's. But look, they get wrecked on Inferno, Mirage. These are two maps FNATIC's supposed to like. SK was just too good at this time. They were beating everyone. Even the best teams like FaZe and Astralis struggled against them and would have really close games, but just couldn't get over the hump. So FNATIC just wasn't a good enough team, but they make a final. They come second. Spoiler, that's basically it. They then go to ECS Season 3 finals. Look at this, last place. So you're going to see They're in a group which isn't even the hardest one. This group here, by the way, contains 3 of the top 4 teams in the world. They're in the one where Cloud9, this is one of the tournaments that they make their final, like a run back to being relevant. And Team Liquid at the time is still the one with the Statistical lineup that's mega flawed. So at this point right in time, right, they get beaten easily by Cloud9 on train, starting on CT. Then they have to play Liquid in the last place match as a best of 3. They get smashed on Mirage and Inferno, 2 of their maps, and they win train narrowly. Like, that's just not really that good. I mean, Liquid doesn't even go and do anything themselves in this tournament. They don't go out of this tournament themselves. You look, they lost to Cloud9. Cloud9 just has like 1 good map against FaZe and is like just an all right team. You can see it's just not there for the Fnatic guys. We'll show you the stats later. Then they have one big tournament before the major. It was actually the one that Astralis chose to skip, most famously, hoping they would win PGL Krakow. So this tournament has every other good team there. Interestingly, I, like Astralis, also chose to skip it. I actually went to see a gig in the UK instead of attend this event, which ESL did ask me to work. Looked like a cool event. They did a Swiss system at this one, and they didn't get through. They actually come 3-2. You can see here, they lose to Mouse Sports on train. This is when Mouse Sports still doesn't have Sonny yet, and they have Dennis. They beat Heroic on Mirage, but it's not a Heroic team you'd care about. They lose to FaZe on Overpass. That's supposed to be their map. If you get on your map, you're supposed to have a chance. They lose to FaZe, one of the best teams in the world, even though they bombed the major coming up. They beat Space Soldiers on Mirage because Space Soldiers was whatever if they weren't on like Cobblestone. And then they lose to SK on Mirage. Admittedly, a hard draw. It's one of the hardest opponents you could get at that point in time. But again, it's a map that you've had success on. You're supposed to eventually match up with these guys and win, right? In fact, you used to hold the psychological edge over these guys, but you lose to them and you don't go to the playoffs. SK wins the whole tournament. Okie doke. The last tournament they play together is the major, PGL Krakow, and it doesn't work out, even though they make the playoffs. So you'll see, in the Swiss system, they sneak through 3-2. Notice they're never cleaning out any Swiss systems ever. They're never just winning their group and topping it when they're in a group stage. They're always on the brink. So it's like, yeah, it could have been better results. They could have broke your way a little bit more. But first of all, you had some close wins as well. And then secondly, you're just not ever beating the top teams in best of 3s. I've told you, the only like big ranked one they won was that Gambit one. And Gambit themselves weren't much of a best of 3 team. So you look, they beat Flipside on Mirage. I mean, Flipside's just whatever when it's not majors and Blade isn't working his magic. They lose to VP on Cash. VP isn't even good at this time, but they had a run at this tournament on home soil. They lose to Astralis on Nuke. That should happen. Astralis is still a very good team. They beat Na'Vi on Mirage, which is actually a pretty big result at the time. Like, Simple's still an extremely good player at this time. And then in the last match, they play against G2 on Overpass. They got their map, and this time they managed to win it. This is actually a big deal because beating G2 here, I'll tell you what, that mattered. This was one of the results that really started to put in question the whole super team and what was the point of it all. They're able to smash them on T-side and they win 16-10. They go into the playoffs and play Gambit, a team they've beaten in best of 3s, a team that in theory should be there for the ticking. This should be like at E-League Atlanta with the different lineup with Twist. This should be a run to the semis against Astralis. It should be quite like the E-League Atlanta major. They get beaten, not convincingly. It's close. But they get beaten. This is where Dorsey has an overperformance for Gambit, and they just lose 2-0. Now, look, even so, if you're FNATIC, hey, we're still in the playoffs of a major, we're still legends, but you're used to winning tournaments. You really thought there was a chance you could do something big here. So that's the end. That's the end of the lineup. Now, this is why, in general, in my opinion, Last Dance lineups are a waste of time. They're usually just a bit of fun, some novelty and nostalgia, but the teams always want top salaries. They all dream they can recreate the magic. They're getting so close. Oh, we're so close, and you wouldn't believe in this qualifier, but it just never happens for them. Just doesn't really happen, right? Because if you go and look at when they had that lineup and they were winning the 6 tournaments, right? And then even, this is when they were winning the 6 tournaments, and then they played the major as well, when they had Dennis, right? First of all, a massive red flag is look at olofm's rating overall. olofm is almost like a hard carry in this team. Not quite, because KRiMZ is fragging out as well. He just has a lower rating, because obviously he dies a lot, because he's more of like a fucking workman player. This is why everyone said olofm is the best player in the world. This isn't the old days where olofm would be really good, but a bit like a device in Astralis, and you'd have flusha popping off, big performances by KRiMZ, sometimes JW coming out, Dennis winning all the pistols. No. I mean, Dennis wasn't there before, but obviously that was his job in this team. No, in general, these are like solid fragging, good fragging from KRiMZ, and Europa, by the way, is not doing that great. And then olofm is just amazing still, a really sick player before his injury. On T side, you can see that it's big time. KRiMZ, look at his fragging, 1.10 on T side of the map. He actually has better kill death differential than olofm, who's the best player at the time, and they're winning all the tournaments. So you can see, always has to do mad work, does KRiMZ. One of the most underrated players of all time. Sometimes flusha just gets mad overrated, in my opinion, at different points in history. He definitely had amazing peaks and was very good at majors, but I think KRiMZ is, for me, the guy who oftentimes was the second best player. On CT side, you can imagine olofm is unbelievable. flusha himself is a beast. He's always got that amazing utility usage. KRiMZ is actually another beast in terms of fragging. W and Dennis frag out. This was a CT-sided team. This was a fragging team generally. But that's when they were at their peak. When they get the band back together, this is just rough, guys. This is just rough. Because first of all, my boy olofm got a 1.01 KD. It's just not fragging, guys. Even his rating's just all right. The best player in the team, believe it or not, actually is JW on his AWP. I mean, that you don't even expect him to be a top 2-3 player in the older FNATIC lineups. KRiMZ is still doing what he can. flusha has absolutely dropped off a cliff and is really bad at this point in time, like seriously costing you games. And Dennis is just whatever, and you used to rely on him just being a fifth component that would win the pistols and the odd clutch and do a bit of T-side fragging occasionally. You go and look also at the difference in terms of like T-sides and stuff. On T-side, it's JW and KRiMZ all day. olofm, he's all right. CT side, JW's the big time fragger. He's saving your arse in these games. Olof is just like good, better fragging, but just okay rating. Dennis is doing a better job than he probably acknowledged. flusha's still just doing fuck all. You go to the original lineup, and on T side, it was all about Olof and Dennis. Olof and Dennis were just doing work. Then you had like JW come up with the AWP. Then you go to this lineup. And on this lineup, the Last Dance one, JW has the most entry attempts and is the best fragger. And Olof and Dennis, I mean, Olof's still all right. He just doesn't frag as much. And Dennis has dropped off a cliff. It's really gone badly for him. So you can see this lineup it just wasn't it. I don't blame him for trying it. It was only like 6 months. I definitely don't blame olofm for knowing his game had gone and leaving and becoming a supportive element in FaZe Clan, a team that had Nico and Guardian and Rain, beasts who could win MVPs and frag the fuck out, and KRiGM, one of the best IGLs, especially for a loose style. So this was like a decent effort at a Last Dance. I can see why they did it, but it's also for me why you generally just don't make Last Dance lineups. Where I come from in England, people will often say, oh yeah, you and whose army? Well, I'll tell you what, I've got my own army backing me up. They're called the Illuminati. Thank you to Ahmed Hadjou, Joseph Adcock, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Theogony, Animosity, Bot Pounder 420, Jensen Goh, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Thooorin, and as always, you know it, a special thanks goes out to my boy Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? You want teasers? Find out who's in the upcoming interviews. Do you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Maybe you want to be part of those long discussions where we talk about anything and everything in esports. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and enlist today in the Illuminati via the Patreon link in the box below.